Hello humans, my name is Dael Kingsmill, and today I have something brand shiny and new on the channel. This is Appendix N, a series where I have the genuine pleasure of sitting down with special guests and talking to them about the kind of things that have inspired their conceptions of fantasy, of sci-fi, of all kinds of different genres, the sort of stories and art and films that have played a hand in how that guest approaches world building and the creation of a setting. Today I am beyond thrilled to have two guests with me. It's Jim and Pruitt from WebDM.
Yes.
Yay!
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to be doing Appendix N. This is a thing that's been living in my brain for a really long time. It's very nice to finally be doing it. Now, WebDM has D&D videos covering seemingly every topic under the sun. Yeah. I mean, there's just so many. Like, you need to hear something about D&D. You type in WebDM and that keyword, and there will be something.
I hope we'd have something. I think of it like it's like a digital library.
Yeah, like a full-on archive.
Yeah.
Any given week's episode, you might be like, maybe not now, but a year from now,
it's coming. Yeah.
That's your episode.
And the thing that I really love as well is that so many of them sort of dip into the nuances of world building, right? Like the finer points of, how to apply stuff within the game itself, so it's not just like, here's some information I know about my world that no one will ever know. No, it's how to express that within the game itself, which I find really useful and interesting. So I just want to start off really broad, and I would love to know some of your media or literary or historical inspirations when creating things, whether it's a character and their place within a setting, or whether it's the setting itself, like anywhere along that scale. If it's a monster, just, what are your sort of touchstones, as it were, that you keep finding yourself coming back to?
Well, I'll do it this way. When I'm doing like just regular like DM prep, one of three movies is going to be on: The 13th Warrior, Alita Battle Angel, because, come on. Especially doing Numenera sci-fi stuff. Come on. It's just every scene is just rife with just, what's that person's story over there with their forearms playing guitar? It's just idea fuel, every frame of that film. But, as far as a player, I was a child that grew up in the 80s and 90s, so when it comes to creating characters, that's just a treasure trove to choose from. Do you want to be the badass and be, Deckard from Blade Runner? Do you want to be, Arnold Schwarzenegger in any of his movies? Do you want to be Rambo, the Thundercats, He-Man? All of these things, and especially, and I think why I was drawn back to D&D is because my sister and I used to watch the D&D cartoon as children, and being raised in a Pentecostal, strictly religious household, we got caught. And, man, that was a bad day. So the next time we just watched it at 2 volume and turned, anyway, wish we had closed captions back then. But anyway, it's just all over the place. But one thing I always come back to when I find myself stagnated is I come back to my favorite book, which is Snow Crash, which is, I think, being adapted right now for television, and I'm just ecstatic. But it's an amazing, cyberpunk dystopian, written in 93, predicts how we use the internet today. It's just...
Is there a specific moment or piece of imagery from Snow Crash that is the thing that nested in your brain and made it this thing that you have to keep coming back to?
To me, it's the opening chapter. It is one of the best openings and introductions of a character, I think. If you're going to name your character hero protagonist, you better have a badass intro. And his intro as the Deliberator is just one of the most amazing things. And it's just Neil Stephenson just flexing his metaphorical muscles, because that's all it is. It's just beautiful metaphor. A bullet glances off his armored gel like a wren hitting a patio door, but excess perspiration wafts through it like a freshly napalmed forest.
Whoa!
Like wind through a freshly napalmed forest. Yeah. I have segments of that whole book just memorized.
How many copies have you had to buy?
At least 4 or 5. I've given away at least 4 copies to people. I'm like, here, read this. Trust me. Like Jim, that was totally from Jim too. And, it's just, it has very personal. It's a very personal book for me, and it might seem a little weird, but it really is, and it helped me, when I was coming out of my shell creatively, and both outside the influence of aforementioned Pentecostal upbringing. So.
And I mean, that is the sign of a good book too, isn't it? That you keep just giving it to people because you're like, you need it more than I do. I'll find another one. It's okay.
Oh yeah, there is another. Just like Skywalkers, there's always another.
There is another.
That's how I found it. Like I had a teacher give a copy to me that was just like, you need to read this, and it's like, here's my copy, and that's how. And then same with Pruitt. I was like, you just got to read this, man. And then like a day and a half later, Pruitt was finished.
Yeah, and by the way, I read that book twice in a row. It's the only book I've
Twice
ever done.
in a row.
I finished it, looked up and went, holy beep, and then flipped back to the beginning and just started
Rewind
over.
the tape,
And
watch it again.
Yep.
Jim, what about you?
Oh man, like, so when I think just like trad fantasy, right? Like vanilla, like good ass vanilla, right? Fantasy, like. There's a lot of stuff from my pre-D&D sort of imagination that I go to whenever I feel like jaded. So it's movies like Princess Bride or Willow or Sword in the Stone. Sometimes like it's what I know of myths. Like I like my ignorance. I'm not an English major. I'm a history guy, but like I don't I sort of know what I've absorbed about various mythologies, and I kind of like that in sort of a narcissistic sense, because it sort of creates its own, like, I'm gonna get this wrong, it's okay, like I'm being inspired by sort of the idea of it. And so I find that my appendix is much like Pruitt's, like kind of all over the place. A lot of it is literary. There's mythology, there's history. I draw a lot from like various historical periods or events. Like it was really easy to just sort of pay attention in class to sort of like, oh, this thing that the teacher's talking about, what if it was a D&D campaign? or something I can mine for it for the next session. But I found like Colleen McCullough's Masters of Rome series is like this dense, like 5 or 6 book series where it's like the back 10th of the book is a glossary of Latin terms that you might need, and it's like 80 years of Roman history dramatized by this novelist, and like with like accolades from ancient historians for her accuracy and fidelity to what we know. And it's like, when I think of that, it's like that's all about politics and backstabbing and influence. And like, if I was going to run another game that featured that, I'd be reading that instead of Game of Thrones, personally. Those are good. Plus, like, the pulp fiction that D&D was founded on. I find like the stuff that inspired D&D is still inspiring for me.
It's such a broad range of like classic inspirations, but like when you say the idea of myth, to me that's what it is, right? It's the idea of what the story is. And that's what mythology was, let's be honest. It was passed through the sources that we have. So far removed from the story's origin,
One guy decided to write it down, and that just happens to be the one that survived 2,000 years to us. It's just an accident of history.
Yeah, and as most humans are prone to do while telling a story, embellishment is like a prime fact. I mean, that just... talk to anybody. It's why eyewitness accounts are so unreliable, right?
That's
like
it.
When you think about that, somebody then hears it and then they tell, well, no, I think you should talk about the part with the pelt more.
I also love that you mentioned that just paying attention to history can be a huge inspiration as well, because when you think about these classic tropes of, cool ass vanilla fantasy, as you said, you end up with, this tendency to just like drop it in the same sort of, the only word I have in my head is medievalist setting, something inspired by a medieval location and period. But then you get these different things if you just change the setting a little bit. If you happen to know a little bit about Joseon period in Korea, then you can end up with a series like Kingdom, where you've taken the zombie tropes and you just drop them in a different place. And suddenly you end up with this fantastic thing that no one's seen before.
I don't want to like treat this sort of source material casually. I don't want to come across like, oh, well, I just, I spend half a second reading a wiki article and now I'm an expert. But like, it's one of those things where a lot of times I deliberately don't want the full story because I just want those fragments. I just want that inspiration, and then we'll make sure that like if I want to dive deeper, I will, and use the sort of details of a particular historical period or mythology or something, like do that. But sometimes just the idea of it, just a fragment, is all you need.
Do you have like very early things that you remember? I mean, Pruitt was mentioning the D&D cartoon, of course, and I think that things that you experience with family in sort of your formative years can be the strangest things. Can just set up shop in your brain and never leave. There are poems and calendars and board games and things from my childhood that I remember that I still carry through, that I apply to D&D and world building today. Do you have things like that?
I definitely do. I know for a fact there's a game called Mousetrap, and in the old school version, I remember my grandmother had it, and me and my cousin and my sister and I used to always like just set it up, and we never really played the game. We would just set it up and set it off because it was just fun to do, and reset and like try to move pieces so you can do it in a little bit different way. And so that's why I think like I really like, I love messing with traps, and like when I play a rogue, I like going all out, and just imagining, the intricacy of picking a lock and things like that. Other than that, like Predator looms large in my mind when I think about like truly terrifying like creatures. Even made a version of Predator as a sorcerer, a dragonborn sorcerer in a game we played. But it looms large because like I remember my dad taking me and him saying, "Never tell your mother about this," and taking me to go see Predator, which I believe it came out in '86, which would have made me like 7, or I might be wrong on the date, but wherever it came out, I was born in '79, so I was like 7 or 8 when I went and saw Predator, and I was amazed by that movie, and I had nightmares for a week. I was Carl Weathers. It was my arm getting blown off and pulling the trigger, and like for a week, the same dream every night, screaming, waking up. And
did your
guess
mom
what?
find out?
No. A couple weeks later, my dad took me back to see it because I was like, I really want to go see it again.
Jim, you mentioned Willow and the Princess Bride earlier. Were they sort of early things? Was your family the family that says you have to watch the Princess Bride?
I mean, well, I remember being told as a kid, like mom coming in and going, like, "You guys are not going to believe this movie I heard about," like, because she was big on movies and so would like watch like she'd watch a bunch of like movie review shows and read them in like the paper, and so she'd always keep a lookout for it because she loved to see movies, and any excuse to go see a movie, she'd me and my brother were like, yeah, let's go watch this movie. And so it's like, yeah, sword fighting and, magic and romance. And it was like just exciting when it came out. And, me and my brother would like, dash all over the front yard with sticks, fight each other, I had always had a preference for swords. Like as growing up, you could get me to do anything if there was a sword within view in like a book or a painting or something like Star Wars. I'm there. They've got laser swords, all my favorite cartoons from the time, they've got swords. Like it was always like my preference. So like when Willow and Princess Bride came out, they were like, I've been waiting. Like, can you believe how long it's taken them to give us these awesome movies? Like not knowing about Conan or, some of the other 80s sword and sandal movies that came out. So, that was later on.
If I go to like a production of Romeo and Juliet or something, or Hamlet, they have their sword fight. I'm like, if you don't give me the Princess Bride, Wesley versus Inigo, if you don't give me that level of choreography, I don't want it. Just get it out of here. Do it off stage. Make it, I don't know, silhouettes or something. Yeah, I think it spoiled me for sword fights forever.
There's a Viggo Mortensen film. It's in Spanish, Captain a la Triste. And it's based on a series of novels, which are absolutely amazing. If you're into like 17th century Mediterranean swashbuckling, it's worth it to track it down. Arturo Perez Reverte is the author's name, and they're like short little books. They're beautiful. But they made a movie of it. They crammed like 7 books into one movie with Viggo Mortensen, and the sword fighting in it is superb. Just phenomenal. I love it. It's great.
All I'm going to say is tunnel fight. That's all I'm going to say.
You do get to see some 17th century siege fighting and and like it's terrifying. It's
Yeah. I want to recreate that in a dungeon one day. My sword fighting, obviously from Star Trek or Star Wars, but also when I read The Hobbit, I wanted a sword, so I asked my grandfather to make me one because he was a carpenter. So he just like threw together 2 pieces of wood and was like, "Here you go." He's like, "What are you gonna do with this?" And I was like, "I'm gonna go slay these goblins." And I was pointing down to his pasture where he had a bunch of wildflowers growing, and they were like, to me, about chest high. And he's like, okay, because he was getting ready to go mow anyway. And after about an hour and a half, that was all gone.
That is the cutest story.
Experience.
Yeah.
That is
It
the
was fun.
cutest story I've ever heard.
Yeah. When I think about my sort of imagination, where like how it gets to sort of a D&D-esque fantasy, to me, the video game series Quest for Glory from Sierra is like a big influence on that, because like Willow and Princess Bride and He-Man and all those others prime the pump, like old Bible stories, right? Like, there's always a sword around, so I'm into it. And so like he cut his ear off, and so like the Quest for Glory games came out, and like that was the first time I was like, oh, there's also this magic, right? Like there's spell casting and wizards and big giants, and like before then it was always sort of like medieval-esque, and Willow has that awesome dragon and the trolls and everything, but it seems like they're singular creatures, like that they're not just sort of a species. But Quest for Glory was one of those where it's like, oh my god, like this thing, I'm going to play an adventurer, and like I could be a thief, I could steal things, and so it's just, it really got its hooks into me, and like I'm kind of glad, because like when I think of contemporary traditional fantasy, it feels so like influenced by itself a lot, and I kind of like that I have this wellspring to draw on that's like predates that or is separate from that. Fun story.
Oh, please.
So Quest for Glory 1, I ran an entire campaign that was based on it, and then we get about this third edition, we get about 7th or 8th level, and we're reaching like what's about to be a very satisfying climax to the campaign. Its conclusion, we could stop here or go on, we don't know. And one of the players shows up and goes, "Jim, did you base this on Quest for Glory 1? And I was like, yeah.
The DM has no robes.
And that's when I had them all captured by Freets and sold to hell. And we played.
That campaign took a hard right turn.
It took a hard right turn. I was like, all right, we're doing something different.
Now, you have a Kickstarter at the moment that we have to talk about, because it was funded like that. It was so fast. People are hungry for it. It's Weird Wastelands is the theme for it. I'm very excited for it personally, and the things I really like about it, it asks, like, even on the Kickstarter page, you have the questions listed there. My favorite kind of world building is asking questions, because it turns out that you know the answers to a lot of those questions, but you start off the Kickstarter page asking questions like, what happens when the gods abandon a planet? What happens when weaponized magic overwhelms a region? And it's got this very very weird sort of apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic vibe to it. So I suppose my next question has to be, what's the first like apocalypse or post-apocalypse text that you can remember experiencing?
Oh, Revelation.
Bible, yeah. Come on.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah.
Two
where
boys
where
from
are
East
you
Texas
from
over
again?
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're both from East Texas, from Chapel Hill, which is a boil on the ass of Tyler.
Yeah. Deep in the piney woods.
Yeah, so Jim was Southern Baptist and I was Pentecostal. So like some
Get
differences.
Saturday Night Fight.
Yeah, so some differences, but still, Revelations was taught quite frequently.
Yeah,
and
that,
so
that
I
makes
mean,
sense.
when I was young, I used to have like apocalyptic dreams all the time. But when you're like listening to the story of Moses and like people in like, making a pilgrimage or an exodus, like all the time, like I'm just like, okay, that makes sense. After I got old enough to realize what was happening, it was like, oh, okay, I see it now.
I was raised Baptist, but I also get the feeling that it's less intense here.
Yeah.
But no, I don't
Well,
remember Revelations so much, but I definitely have very strong memories of learning about Exodus and the plagues of Egypt. And of course, I mean, the flood, Noah and the flood. What a terrifying story when they go, and everyone was bad, so they all had to drown. Like,
So they all had to drown. Talk about
Yes,
setting.
yes. Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I was. Everybody thought I was a weirdo for liking Revelation. But I was like, "There's a dragon in it."
Yeah.
I'm like, it's got like a lot of heads and like
Open up a bunch of seals.
Yeah, and then in like the late '80s and early '90s, there was a huge sort of like push to like try to throw out the Soviet Union as being part of the Book of Revelation, and I got my hands on some weird literature. My dad was like, "You please don't read that anymore. Like, we're gonna take this away." I was like, "Thank you, Dad." In hindsight, I really appreciate that.
And that was also right in the middle of the Satanic Panic as well.
Yeah, it was all that. So it was like
so-
there was a lot out there that was like are you a spirit warrior for your, your church or something? And so there was a lot of fantasy talk, imagery, lots of warrior angels and whatever. And like I was just taking it in a different direction. I was like, you guys don't know I'm using this for my D&D game that I wrote. And I was the pastor's kid as well. So I was always had access to sort of like, someone's interpretation of this book of the Bible or something. And one of the first RPGs I ever made, I was like, Dad, I'm going to make an RPG based on like the Bible. And he was like, okay, like he was supportive and play tested it.
I remember this. You've mentioned this in a video. You were like 11 and you tried to make a Revelations tabletop RPG.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
ambition right there.
It was, yeah. I didn't keep at it very long, but I tried.
It should just be a game, like a completely like narrative game where everybody just reveals secrets.
There is, there is a game that you recite Bible verses to activate your character's special abilities. Not Dragon Strike, Dragon something. Someone in chat, someone in a comment or a chat somewhere will know. But let's trust YouTube. But I played that one with my dad as well, and we both agreed that it just wasn't very fun. But I do credit that with my obsession with the post-apocalypse. I know for me a formative movie was Planet of the Apes, and like the end scene where there's like the Statue of Liberty on the beach, like freaked me out. Like my parents had to talk me down from the ceiling because I was like, how six
It was
or so,
all
and dealing with
along!
it's like, what do you mean this whole thing could end? It fucked with me.
No.
And so like ever since it's been a genre that I like playing in because of that. Like this used to be our home and now it's savage and ruined. And
You've mentioned before that the apocalypse is kind of baked into fantasy conceptually. And I mean, it comes from so many sources, like Lord of the Rings is in many ways sort of a post-apocalyptic world, and that, becomes the thing that so much of high fantasy is based on now. I mean, you brought up the dragon with 7 heads from Revelations. That I just, as you said that, realized that one of my formative fantasy texts was a movie called Flight of Dragons, a Rankin Bass movie. And at the end of that movie, of that movie, the evil wizard sort of shows up in the form of this like 7-headed dragon. It's really freaky. And it's
it really sticks in your head and like. And I feel like that like D&D kind of started out that way. D&D starts out as a game where you're like, the creators are like, we really like this pulp literature. We want to play this one figure right here on the board. We don't want to play all of them, and then like takes from all these different sources to create this thing that's a hot mess. That's just like immediately as soon as it comes out, people are like, this is stupid. I can do better, and yet it's endured for as long as it has, and is been such a fun part of people's lives and spawned so many other games. That's like I like being able to like continually come back to those sources and be inspired in new ways, from the same stuff. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, the DM that roped me into playing D&D, he paved the way by introducing me to like Baldur's Gate, like the games, and also Fallout. And so Fallout from a very early age was an influence. And so, I mean, it doesn't get much more wasteland than that.
Like, you mentioned like sort of fantasy and post-apocalypse, like it's for me as someone who's studied a lot of history, and up until they told me I had to learn Latin and Greek Ancient history was my deal, and I was just like, no, thank you. I switched to English history. To me, the world of like what would be called like the early Dark Ages, is inaccurate a term that is, but like that late antiquity, fall of Rome, people living in the midst of civilization that's like, we know that we used to be able to do great things. Like someone built these great monuments and these roads and whatever, and we had like a cultural memory of it, but it's like beyond their grasp. And I feel like there's parts of like Beowulf and some of the stuff that inspired Tolkien that has a hint of that, enough of a hint of that it like comes out in Lord of the Rings, where there's all these ruins everywhere, and Numenor has sank, and the elves have retreated to the west, and it's like there's a sadness to it that I find very satisfying, because like you really like you have to like sort of stare down this gulf of sort of these this centuries of history that has been lost to these people, and we're watching them at the end of their age. Like this is the story of a people who are already gone, and like through the Red Book of Westmarch we get to like experience it, and like that's what I loved about it when I read it, and like one of the things that I really like in fantasy is that longing and that deep history. Is very very inspirational to me.
And there's that fascinating thing as well of like, how can we have forgotten this thing if it's still within living memory, which is so present in Apocalypse texts, and kind of leads into this inherent curiosity for exploration that comes up in D&D, and it's so bizarre to me that exploration as a pillar of D&D has become so diminished. But I'm very excited that for Weird Wastelands, you've taken on the issue, you've tackled. I mean, we've talked before on your Patreon podcast. We talked a little bit about the idea that the frontier, this sort of wide expanse of stuff to be found, is at the core of D&D. Do you have any, like, what was your wisdom? What did you discover while trying to come up with exploration that actually functions?
I wanted to do two things, and my inspiration, a lot of the design choices for it were, number one, to reduce the tedium involved in some of the bookkeeping aspects of survival, tracking food and things like that. To eliminate it entirely is to get rid of too much, but adding, finding the weights for all your gear in a book and trekking off how many days of rations you have and the like. There's only a certain type of player that finds that enjoyable. That's myself. So like, I don't mind doing that. Therefore, I know that once you take that part of the game seriously, this whole pillar really opens up. And like, once you take, like, it's not a guarantee that I'm going to get to the place where I want to have a heroic adventure, whole and healthy and ready to adventure. Like, the getting there is as much a part of the challenge as the getting back. To bring back Lord of the Rings, right? Like, Frodo and Sam are worried they're not going to have enough food to get back home, even if they can deal with this ring. Like, their adventure is not over once they get to Mount Doom. And like, I like leaving that on the table. I like leaving that as a part of play, but it is tedious to keep track of all that currently. So one thing is addressing that, and then the other is to add context and meaning and real choice to moments in the wilderness. Like, a dungeon is interesting because it's these sort of self-contained rooms that maybe there's interaction between the various rooms of them, but like each one of them sort of presents a challenge or an obstacle or a puzzle or something, and the players sort of proceed through this maze-like labyrinth structure dealing with creatures of the underworld and foul magics and the like, and it's got a rhythm and a pace to it that works really well. And then the wilderness, you just have to do it differently to get that same effect. And I think 5th edition says it puts too many things that completely bypass that into the hands of the players, because they understand that it can be tedious. And so what we wanted is to say, like, for instance, I'm playing a ranger, not because I never want to get lost, but because if we do get lost, you need me. And I don't want to skip this part of the game. This is a moment I want us to zoom in on, and present me, the ranger player, a moment to shine, to have an interesting choice to make, to be the clutch, to be the thing that you needed.
The same way that a rogue might shine if you have traps that you have to bypass, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is, like you said, the diminished exploration pillar means that now all you have is big damn hero adventures where you just go save the world. And to invoke Lord of the Rings one more time, if you had that same mentality in Lord of the Rings, then they would have taken the fast travel option of the Eagles to just fly over and drop the ring in. But then that would have been a 10, 20-page book. I don't know. Like, all the adventure's gone. And so, I don't know. Let's put some adventure back in there before you get to the dungeon. You never know what you might find. That's the thing, is like there's all kinds of things on the way there that you could find to enhance your character and party.
One of the things that many of the tools that we want to provide are things that a DM can use to make sure the playground that they're playing, because sandbox is a nice term, but a sandbox is barren sand. You know, cats poop in it if you're not careful. You know, like, it has the potential for greatness, but I would prefer to think of us as building a playground. There's a sandbox there. You can run all around, have a lot of good times, but there's structures already there, so that at the very least, when your players set out into this inhospitable wilderness where you're going to ask them to keep track of their food and water and to like pay attention to their survival needs, you can, with a straight face and certainty, say there is something awesome out there. And it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get to it, but once you do, it's going to be great. It might be dangerous, deadly, inconvenient, but not boring. And so that's where we're coming from with like filling that content, so that there is actually stuff to do when you're out in the wilderness.
Apocalypses kind of fills in this this wastelands portion, but you've not just made a post-apocalyptic fantasy. You've got weird wastelands in this book. So you've got this real emphasis on the weirdness of magic. You almost treat magic as kind of like a toxic spill in some capacity. Yeah. But before we started recording, I mentioned the Manticore, which I love. But the Magicore, you've got this little sidebar there that says, think about what it means to eat magic, to consume it and make it a part of you. And that sort of question of like, okay, magic isn't just a thing that happens and then it's gone. What happens when weaponized magic overwhelms a region? You've got these questions about how magic comes into play in an apocalyptic sort of a landscape. So, I would love to know what influences your personal conceptions of what magic should feel like.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Well, Jack Vance, obviously, Tales of the Dying Earth. Like, that, like, once reading that, D&D makes sense. Like, you're like, oh, I see where you got this from. Also, Mr. Strange and Dr. Norrell. Like, I thought that was
Jonathan
just like
Strange and Mr. Norrell.
Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Like, I thought that was name? Such... Yeah, but I've been called Pruitt my entire life. I seriously, I do not identify as Jonathan. It's hard for me to, like, remember, like, answer to that. But yeah, like that, the way they portray magic and, like, actually you get to see the difference between a wizard and a sorcerer. Like, they just show you what that means. And that was just eye-opening. I don't know. It's just it's one of those that changed it more than I would say Harry Potter or any of the other ones.
Yeah, it's one of mine as well. Things like they have these moments where, and Susanna Clarke is just incredible in the way that she uses language to express magic. She has things like she talks about the color of rain. And, when she describes fairies, she describes them as wearing a dress made of a winter sunset or, a necklace of broken promises. And you know what that means. You can somehow picture it even though it doesn't have an image to it.
Or like how Dresden sees magic when he opens his third eye. Like in kind of in that same way, where you see the forest that the wood from the house is made from and all that. I love that kind of anything that's very visual. I love it.
I'll come back to Vance. Like there's a weird magic in the Dying Earth stories. Like some of them, it's like this is clearly D&D magic. Like they're literally talking about how many spell slots they have as they read this magic book, preparing prismatic spray. And then there's other stories where they're like summoning entities from the ethereal void to like perform magic for them, and like the most powerful archmages are those that can like call these creatures that can perform just whatever you want. Like they're not limited by these formulas or set effects, the Sandestins or something like that, and they're like zooming across the galaxy looking for unstones at the edge of existence and doing like all kinds of time travel stuff, you know. It's like really out there. And like one of the ideas there that I loved, and sort of like similar with mythology, is like I'm just going to take this little idea, which is that magic is a thing that lives in your mind, and you have to make a home for it. Like part of what a magic user does is like prepare themselves to be a home. And so for me, that's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, there's no real disconnect between your mind and your body. So that you've got to like eat alchemically and astronomically aligned food in order to make, you know, to like get the right arcane balance in you. And like you're changing yourself as a wizard to become a vessel for these creatures, or these entities called spells. And so like there's a bit of that in Weird Wastelands, in the sense that like magic changes you. The use of magic, like it alters you. It's a force. It's powerful, you know. And I like, one of the things I like about role-playing games is like taking things seriously that play culture or the game says you can just ignore that part, you know. Like, but I'm like, well, wait, I've been told all my life in fairy tales not to eat magic food. I've been told every time, if a fairy or somebody offers you food, don't eat it. It's bad news. And like, unless it comes from the gods, I'm not touching it. And so there's I want to like play with that notion of like magic changes you, that it's not this ephemeral thing that's functionally a superpower, that, you know, you press your character sheet button and it does magic. It's like a force in the world. And like the other big influence for me in that sense, especially when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons, is Eberron. I really like Eberron's take on magic. I really think it feels logical. I know not everybody's into like the sort of steampunky magitech kind of thing, but I dig it. I like the blurred genres there. And like when I think of D&D magic, it always has a physical component to it. There's always material, you know, that's needed. So it makes sense to me that it could be industrialized and mass produced and could go wrong, you know. Could be that when everybody's running around in their pseudo medieval paradise, that like there's just not enough magic for it to be bad. But once they get to their 21st century equivalent of that it's like really bad. Like you shouldn't have all these extra dimensional spaces around. You shouldn't be conjuring all these creatures. You should, like, it's just bad for the world. And you know, that's the idea. That's sort of the central idea that we're playing with, is that rather than say Dark Sun's version of the Wastelands, which is no magic, you know, magic destroyed this place and now nobody does it, everybody hates them. Ours is like, this place is thick with magic. You're going to trip over it out there. Like there's no square inch of this wasteland that wasn't once changed alchemically. This used to be fields of alchemically enriched wheat, you know, just for miles, and now it's just gray dust.
It's got this kind of industrial or post-cyber industrial edge to it almost. This idea of like taking this thing, this natural force, or, you know, substance, there must be a better word for it, but these are the words that are coming to mind, and just using it as fuel, using it for good but to extremes, using it for bad to extreme, you know, until it just completely changes the world. I mean, that's exactly what we did with coal, with oil, and you know, you see it again here, but in pretty technicolor images.
I didn't want something that was going to be drab and bland, and I wanted to look colorful and bright. And to me, one of the best things about post-apocalyptic, say like, you know, Mad Max, or one that I rewatched recently, Waterworld, which is I enjoyed it, is that like the use of the thing that destroyed this place in the first place. Like, you know, like I get, you know, it's nuclear weapons that set the world on fire in Mad Max, but like the fact that they're still looking for gasoline, like that they're still trapped, like they're having to make do with what this civilization left to them, and like that means that you got to keep some of this running, and it's, you know, like it's still a valuable resource, and we kind of remember how it was supposed to be, but that was like 40 years ago maybe. Like it's just that trying to hold on to something.
The other thing that stands out to me that I have to bring up is that there is a preface to the title of Weird Wastelands that is Worlds of WebDM, which holds the delightful promise of more books to come in the future. So what are some other genres of storytelling that hold the most draw for you?
Well, I mean, any viewer of WebDM knows that Jim had a game set in the land between two rivers, which is a post-apocalyptic wasteland, oddly enough.
Yeah.
And so, we thought that it'd be a good idea to provide that for them. And viewers would also know that I ran a game that was using altered Spelljammer rules. So, I mean, depending on writing about different worlds, even in one book, you could be writing about multiple worlds if you did the right setting. So, we'll just see what the stars have to hold. But, that's as much as I can dance around.
Well, your dancing around the question is noted.
Yes.
We all note it, and we all wait.
Yeah,
we all wait now.
The eyes are upon us.
I don't think y'all will have to wait that long.
This is not a setting book. This is it's
right.
kind of designed to take bits and pieces and drop in at your leisure. What you want to do. You've got so much. It's packed full of stuff. Yeah. You've got locations, monsters, adventure hooks, factions, spells. You've made spells. You've got all kinds of stuff, subclasses. You've got a Scion class that you've built. So honestly, for people watching this, please go and check out the Kickstarter. It looks like it's going to be the coolest book this side of the two rivers. This has been wonderful. Is there anything specifically that you want to pimp out about the book that I haven't touched on?
I would say if you haven't, we put out a pretty dense preview promo kind of thing. If you haven't gone and checked it out, it features a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. It's the Magicore, the magic-eating Magicore. It's got a druid subclass for those druids who are driven to avenge the dying landscape.
And how do you play a druid in a wasteland?
Yeah, barbarian-inspired druid who is sort of nature's avenger type that we have. And then there's the toxic alchemical sump, which is we just wanted to pack as much stuff into it and to present a location that's like, do you want just a pit stop along the way somewhere and a little quirky encounter, or do you want to build like a full adventure around this thing and have it sort of like pick and choose which features you want to use and things like that. So yeah, if you want to see where our heads are at with it, check that out.
Yeah, and pretty quickly we hit the war wagons stretch goal.
Oh, yeah.
So we're gonna have some vehicles in there because you got to have a wasteland, you got to have vehicles. I mean, come on.
I mean, we're talking about inspirational texts. Mad Max cannot be ignored.
No, you can't. And I just love...
Waterworld to a degree.
Waterworld is
same thing.
Mad Max in the ocean.
Yeah,
It's great. Anyway, it's worth a revisit. I love all the Mad Max movies. Like the first one is one of those where it's like you can see this society that's sort of like barely hanging on, and it's clear that this is sort of like a country, maybe like a border region of some kind. And like I grew up in places like that where there's just like huge expanses of nothing between little like podunk towns and things, and so it felt familiar to me. And yet at the same time, it's like clearly a D&D setting. Like you can't just go travel around the roads around here. You got to be careful where you go. You got to. There's bandits. There's monsters out there, and then to watch like each successive one sort of like show the fallenness of the society and how the people there are dealing with it. So you watch the second one and you realize like these people had office jobs. Right, like they were just like suburbanites, and now they're dressed up in S&M gear, killing each other with handmade crossbows. Like
they were alive in the before times, and yet they've completely swapped to the apocalypse culture. I like to imagine that Mad Max is just Western Australia if they ever do secede. Well, okay, so people can check out the Kickstarter. There will be a link in the description. People can check out the videos that you're making going into stuff. You've talked more in depth about the wilderness exploration and the such. Fresh videos, go check them out. There'll be a link in the description and also somewhere on the screen.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at jpruinc.
I am the real Jim Davis over on Twitter. That's right, I got the name. And not that Garfield drawn guy. And I technically have an Instagram, but I don't know. I only use it to like pictures of my son that my wife posts. So, like that's
It's a noble cause.
Yeah, it's what
Yeah,
Instagram's really for.
Mostly though, we're over on our YouTube channels and hanging out. And every video while the Kickstarter is running will be about some element of it. So stick around for the coming weeks for more info.
So people can find out more there. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It has been lovely talking about your inspirations, learning what has gone together to make the way your brain works, the machinations. It's Jim Davis and
pleasure.
Pruitt from WebDM.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so
very
much.
much, Dale, for having us on.
Bye. I don't know how to end videos. I don't even remember right now what my outro is. It's been too long. This isn't good.
There've been some that literally we like say something and then one of us will go yeah, and then we're just stop.
Yeah.